Hey, good morning or afternoon, everyone. This is Mark Hamblin here, and today we're going to spend a little bit of time on our import-export power tool and go through how you can use that to, sort of improve your efficiencies when you're doing imports and other things. So now we can import, again, any table, including the subledgers and things like that. If you want to import, sort of the subledger stuff, you do need to enable that in the setup that you have access to the protected tables. Otherwise, it's just going to skip that table entirely, not import it at all. As I mentioned earlier, in that text file, I can create a text file with any fields I want in it, randomly pick what I want, add, remove fields, don't have to go into a config package and deal with it or anything else, and just suck it in. A couple other little goodies that you can do. Where this is often used is when you're, spinning up a new environment and you need to import sort of opening balances and things like that. So one of the nice things is you can import the lot and serial numbers to an item journal. Like quite often you're coming from one system to another and you need all those lot numbers and serial numbers. Well, yeah, I can suck those in automatically using the import-export power tool. It'll create all the appropriate entries and away you go. We also already talked about notes and links. And again, ledger entries. And I'm going to show you this as well, because this allows us to go in and bring in things like sales history. Now, typically when people bring in sales history, what they want to do is they bring it all in as journal entries and post those journal entries and then have to zero out the GL entries and all that kind of stuff. Well, with the power tool, you don't have to do any of that. I'll show you a way you can bring in, old entries like historical data without having to bring in journals and posts and all that kind of stuff. All right, and a few other things here, and again, the events, if you want to bring in like blobs, like files that you want to bring in as attachments, things like that, that's where you would extend it yourself with those events that are published. All right, so let's actually have a look at how we do imports. I'll show you a couple of quick examples here. So actually, the first one I'm going to show you is I will actually show you that item journal import that I just mentioned. So here I've got, a file. Come on, open it. And what it's going to do is it's coming into the item journal line. And up at the top, we've got all the fields that we want to fill in. And, you can use an export to actually, generate the file format you need. But really all you need is this table ID up at the top. And that can be a table name or a number. So that could have been, table 83 or whatever it is. 81 or 83, something like that, or the name. And then what we need is really, sort of the primary key fields to be able to insert, and then all the other fields that we might need. Now, so this is the file that I'm going to be importing. And you'll notice we've got, a bunch of items here, and we've got this serial number column. So the serial number column is going to bring in all of these serial numbers. And if I had lot numbers, I would just come in and add in the lot number field and the expiry date field and all that kind of stuff. And if I entered information in here, it would import that as well at the same time. Okay, so that's basically what we're going to do. We're going to bring this in. And you'll notice here on the quantity, we've got a star in front of the quantity, and we've got a star in front of the item number field. And you'll see in a sec, what that means is we're going to validate that information. So the idea behind that is, none of these other fields, we're not going to run any additional business logic when we bring in these additional fields here. The only time we run the built-in Business Central business logic is when we have a star on it. So the idea behind this is, what you want to do is think about how you would type this data into an item journal or any screen within Business Central. I type in the item number and I type in the quantity. Most of the rest of the stuff would probably default in, and of course the serial number. But anything that I would normally manually type in, you may want to validate that because it runs the underlying business logic for that field. So for example, when I type in an item number, the underlying business logic brings in the description, brings in the unit of measure, brings in all of those sorts of things. If we validate that on import, it's going to run that same logic and fill in all of those fields for us automatically, so we don't actually have to import those fields. So you see there's no unit of measure. I mean, if you needed an alternate unit of measure, you'd list it here, but we don't have to import the base unit of measure. We don't have to import the description, any of those sorts of things, because we're validating it. It's going to bring it in automatically. All right, so that's the file I'm going to use initially to import an item journal. So we go into the power tool here, and I'm going to go to import. And here we've got a few different things that we can do. So let's talk about these options real quick before I run the import. So obviously we want to import data and insert that data, but I could also just say, you know what, I'm going to import existing records and only update. And if it finds a record that doesn't live in Business Central already, it's going to give me an error message and saying, I don't have that record to update. You can't import that record, right? For the current example, I'm going to be doing the import into the item journal. This two-step insert, that's kind of the default. And you know, there's no harm in doing that. It slows things down a little, because what this does, if you have that enabled, is it first inserts the record with just the primary keys. So let's say I'm importing a customer record or a bunch of customer records. It'll sort the record with just the customer number, and then it'll do an update to update the remaining fields on that now existing record. Okay, so that's very handy in a lot of cases. So in some cases within Business Central, it needs that functionality enabled, otherwise it won't import properly, right? Because when we actually insert the record, it goes and makes a bunch of changes to the fields that were in your import, and now your fields didn't import properly. So sometimes you need to turn this on. For the item journal import, I'm going to leave that off because I know I don't need it. But if you leave this off by default, you import it and your results aren't, you know, what you expected, turn that on and you're good to go. Like I said, this slows things down a little because it does two operations. It does an insert, then it does an update. With this turned off, it just does the insert. Okay. Down here is that validation. So I can validate all fields, which means every field I import runs the underlying Business Central business logic. You typically don't want to do that. You typically want to, you know, again, mark any fields for validation that you would normally have to manually type in. Anything that you manually type in into the user interface when you're bringing in data, you'd want to set up to be validated. And again, if you run an import and it doesn't work the way you expect, you can switch it and have it validate all fields, and away you go and get better results. This field delimiters, quite often, I mean, this is not that, you know, common, but quite often if you're exporting something, bringing it into Excel and then saving it, Excel is going to add a bunch of quotes and stuff around some of those fields. So what this will allow you to do is the system will automatically remove those quotes if it detects the fact that you've got extraneous quotes within the data, right? So like in a description that has a comma in it or something like that, Excel is going to put extra quotes around that. Well, this will strip those quotes from that data automatically. Okay, over here, if I have missing fields or tables, it's going to prompt me. So in other words, if I've got an import and I've got a field, I typed a field in there that doesn't exist in Business Central, or I exported it from Nav, and now I'm bringing it into Business Central and it doesn't exist, it'll just pop up and say, hey, that field doesn't exist. Do you want to continue? And I can cancel the import at that point, or I can just ignore any missing fields, which is great, right? Because if I have, you know, a table in Nav that's got a whole bunch of custom fields, I can export that in Nav, suck it in here. If I don't have those custom fields in BC, it'll just ignore them and import the core data. And that's great for, you know, doing demos or proof of concepts using Nav data or other systems data within BC. Or I can have it error out and just prevent me from importing if the fields don't exist within BC. These guys down here, again, more business logic validation. So the idea behind this, the on insert trigger, after I insert a record, this will run any additional business logic to, you know, update the data or update alternate data, those types of things. So quite often when you're doing inserts, it's worth having that turned on. And same thing with updates when you're modifying, like allowing record updates. You probably want to turn that on, you know, to run that underlying business logic. But again, you know, you can give it a shot. If it's not working the way you expect, you can turn these on or off. And of course, disabling the change log I mentioned earlier. And then finally, the text encoding. You know, typical one is UTF-8. Those are the two. UTF-8 gives you the sort of international characters and things like that. Otherwise, MS-DOS is kind of fine as well. All right. And by the way, if I export something from you know, an external system like NetSuite or something like that, it's likely going to save that as UTF-8. And in those text editors, like that Notepad++ I mentioned, you can actually check what the encoding is. So it'll tell you if it's UTF-8 or ANSI, which is MS-DOS. But typically, it's going to be UTF-8 if you're exporting from an external system. All right. Anyway, those are the details. Like typically not much you have to modify on here. I'm going to do the record inserts. I'm going to do the import data. We're going to come in. we're going to grab that item journal that I had before. It's going to grab it. And by the way, I think I had, what did I have, 500, 1,000 lines on that. So it's going to go through. But what it's doing here while it's importing is it's creating those item journal lines. And again, as you know, in Business Central, the first time you do a new operation for the first time, it takes a little longer. So if I'm doing this, a second time, if I did that same import a second time, it's probably going to take like 10 seconds, right? Because this is the first time I did it. It takes a while for it to cache the data and the code and everything else. But it took 25 seconds to import those 1,000 records. Typically, it's a lot shorter than that, right? Normally, when I do this, it's 10, 15 seconds for 1,000 records. But even this isn't bad because this is a linear time for the most part, which means that if I had 10,000 records here, it would be about 10 times the amount of time. So it'd be 250 seconds, right? So less than 5 minutes to import 10,000 records. And again, typically it's going to be a couple of minutes. We're not talking about 5 minutes to import 10,000 records. It's just this is the first time I did it. So very fast to do those imports. And then of course, to see what it actually did, when it did that import, let's go into the item journals. And I said import into the import batch. Here's all the data that's imported, those 5 or 1,000 lines. And then of course, each line had a serial number associated with it. So it brought in the serial number and everything appropriately. And as I mentioned, if you had a lot number, expiration date, it would have brought those in as well. So that's an easy way to bring in your serial numbers, lot numbers, those sorts of things. And you'll notice actually when I go in here, now as of Business Central 22, I believe, they have this option as well, item tracking on lines. If you've got that enabled like I did for this, what that also allows you to do is import, without using the import export power tool, that serial number or lot number right onto the line itself. And in that case, you probably don't actually need to use the import export power tool to bring in serial numbers, lot numbers. It'd just be way, way slower, right? So anyway, that's what this thing does. And because I opened up that serial number page, it now lists it on here. But all of these guys do have the appropriate serial number brought in automatically based on that import export power tool. All right, so again, this is how I'd want to bring in opening balances, right? I'm going to bring in the opening balance for all of these individual items and serial numbers and everything else. I'm going to post this journal and I'm good to go. But if I want to bring in history, I don't necessarily want to do that. Now, again, a lot of people, when they're bringing in history, they bring it into the item journal and they post it to get the ledger entries. That generates GL entries and value entries and a whole bunch of stuff. And that's kind of ugly. What I want to do is I want to bring in sales history for this particular customer without having to do all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to show you how to do that. This is going to take a little longer and I'm going to run out of time for sure, but I'm going to show you this because it's kind of interesting. We get this question a lot. So the first thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to import a bunch of items. So if I go in here into my item list, come on, wakey. All right. Now, I've got a bunch of the standard items, but if I look, in this range here, I've got no items in sort of that 9 million range or whatever I'm going to bring in. So first I'm going to import the items for this particular customer. So we're going to import a whole bunch of new items. So what I'm going to do is come in here, hit import data, and the items that I'm going to bring in, I'll just open it up here. I'll open it up in the text editor. So it's just, starting with 9. And I've got 500 items that I'm going to bring in, okay? So I'm going to bring in 500 items. There's very little information. I've got the item number, description, some posting groups, and that's basically what I'm going to bring into the system. So we're going to grab that guy. We're going to bring in those items. And by the way, in this particular case, I would have normally turned off that, run the on insert trigger because I actually don't need it. I know just based on the way the code looks that I don't actually need this. With that on, it takes a little more time to run, but it still took 6 seconds to import those items. So if we go back and look at those items now, all right. And we look now, as soon as BC wakes up, come on. Okay, so we look now, we've got all of these items that we just brought in, and they're valid items. Oh, and one of the things I should mention is, I brought in that unit of measure and everything else. I didn't have to go in and set the subtable or anything like that. It's come in and it's set the appropriate unit of measure and it's created the the item units of measure, information, and everything automatically, right? So it was very simple. I imported like 4 fields, and I got everything I need to make this a valid item that I can use like right now if I want. And of course, it didn't bring in any history. Everything's 0. I've got no history, but again, I want sales history for all these items that I just brought in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import that sales history, but we're going to prep it first. So I'm going to show you a few tricks for prepping that sales history. So the first thing is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up this, this item history. So this is all my individual transactions for all of those different items by day, right? So if I scroll down here, you can see, over the 12 months of 2023, this is all my sales history. And we happen to have, about 1 million records in this file, right? So 999,000 records in this file. This is what we're going to import. But I don't want this level of detail. I want monthly history. So I just want to, consolidate this as a monthly history import. So I'm going to show you a couple of tricks to do that. Now, normally what I would do is I would just, bring this stuff into SQL Server, run a quick query, and it'll dump out the format, the file exactly the way you need it. But I'm going to do it in Excel just in case you don't have access to SQL or whatever. So I'm opening up that same data in Excel now, those 1 million records. So it takes, Excel chugs along for a little bit here as it opens. We're going to bring in those 1 million records. All right, so here we go. We've got this open in Excel. Here's my roughly 1 million records, based on individual dates. And what I did was I just came in and I created a formula here to show me, the month. So this is grouping all of the individual dates by month. And what I did was I just used the first of the month. I'm going to set my history as of the first of the month for every month, just so I don't have to worry about if there's 29 days or 31 days in a month. Everything just comes in as of the first of the month. Now, this is great, but again, I want to summarize by month. I want to sum up all the sales for this particular item by month. So how do you do that? Well, what we do is use a pivot table. Again, if you're using this in SQL, it's a quick query, and it gives you everything you need, and you export that file, and you're good to go. But I'm going to do it in Excel here, and I'm going to create a pivot table just because I'm going to show you some tricks in Excel for doing this. So here's our pivot table. And what we're going to do is, of course, item number and quantity here. And there's our total sales for this particular item, but it's not by month. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop this in and see it by month as well. So now I've got item number by month, and maybe you also want it by location code just for fun. So here I've got it item number, month, location code. And what I'm going to do while I'm here is I'm just going to not subtotal that. Now this is great, except I can't export this into a flat text file the way I want to do it, right? Like this is not that useful for me. It breaks out, my sales by month for all this, and great, but it's not useful. So here's a few tricks you can use within Excel. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into pivot table options, and if I go to the display here, one of the options is this classic pivot table layout. So if I do that, magically now what happens is I've got, item number, date, location, and quantity. So now I've got this in a flat format that I could actually use, right? This is the format that my file needs to import this data. But we're missing, this stuff here. So here's another little quick trick you can use. If I go in here and I do field settings, if you go to layout and print, I just repeat the item labels. And guess what? Now I've got pretty much the exact file I need to import in here. I just come in and select all this data, and I can import it. And that's what I've done. I've actually come in with the magic of copy and paste and a few little tricks, because your sales history needs to be negative. What I did was I took the total. Like if we look at this, I took the total. This is a key point. This needs to be my opening balance, because this is my opening balance, and then this is going to draw down on that opening balance. So at the end of this import, I'm going to be left with a quantity of 0 in stock. So again, with the magic of copy and paste, what I did there was I grabbed that total, that's it here. And then if we scroll down a whole bunch, we get to the transactions. So all the transactions now are negative. So this item, this month, this is my sales quantity. And if I find that item in the next month, it's going to have a sales quantity and everything else. So this is the actual file I'm going to use. I'm going to basically copy and paste this into a text file or save this as a text file, and I'm good to go. And so what that ends up looking like after I do that is this. So if you don't know what table 32 is, that's my item ledger entry table. And I could have put an item ledger entry in here if I like as a description. So what I've got is the entry number is the item ledger entry number. Now I started at 1,000 because I've got existing item ledger entries, but if this is a brand new system, you'd start at 1 and go up. And I just generated these in Excel. Of course, I opened this up in Excel and just had it generate this stuff down. And here you can see it's going to bring in my opening balance of 48,000, and then all of these guys below it are going to draw down on that 48,000, and this will add up to 0 at the end. And I added a couple of other things, right? So I've got my quantity. I've got the invoiced quantity as well. So I should have opened this up in Excel, but I've got invoiced quantity, and of course the remaining quantity is going to be 0. So let's actually see what this looks like. Now I stripped this down. It resulted in about 6,000 records in total. I cut it down a little just to increase the import speed. And what we're going to do is just go import data. We're going to come in and we're going to grab the opening balance data for that. And again, what we're doing here is we're sucking this directly into the item ledger entries. There's no posting required, which means there's no impact to the GL. There's no value entries. There's none of that stuff that gets generated. But we get that sales history, right? So now if I open up the items, give it a sec to load here, and we go in and look at our item numbers that we imported previously, right? We're still all 0, but if I open any of these guys up, we've now got that full sales history for those items in the system, right? So in reverse order, because the default sort order is by entry number, but here we've got our opening balance, 50,000, and then all our sales month by month until we get basically down to 0. So that is how you can import. And this goes for anything. I mean, item ledger entries are pretty typical, but I went from 1 million records down to 6,000 records, takes like 30 seconds to import. And now I've got my monthly sales history. And quite often people will also break this down by customer. Same process. Now I've got my monthly sales history by item and customer and location. Very easy to do. And the Power Tool makes that very simple, right? The prep for it, again, SQL Server is easier, but if you want to use Excel, those are some tips and tricks in Excel you can use to do that import. Now, while I'm here, just for fun, because I said I would, I'm going to we'll just bring in the sales order stuff. So what I did was brought this in. Oh yeah, what I want to do is I want to update, because it's going to try and do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import those record links, and I forgot to change my settings, and it gave me a nice error saying you can't do that. So I'm going to update the records because I'm bringing in record links. And I'm not going to, run any triggers because we don't need it. We're just bringing in the record links. And so we're going to bring in those sales order record links. That's going to come in, imported those. And now if we look at this guy here, easier way, if you search the company data, sometimes that's a quicker way of doing it, except I didn't know I lied. All right, let's go with the sales orders. I couldn't remember the actual sales order number that I used. I think it was 1. We'll find it here as soon as everything loads. And, all right, so there it is. There's the links that I imported using that import, right? So just these links that you saw earlier in the thing. And again, I could have brought in notes and all that kind of stuff as well. All right, so that's the import side of it. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you on the next webinars. Talk to you later.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more great content, and remember to hit that bell icon to stay updated. See you in the next video.